27 miles. You can see from there the UK.
Really?
Yeah, you can see the door.
Yeah.
The front of you, yeah. You can see the light of the UK.
This is the sound of a business transaction. He's selling a destination, a promise of safety, visible across 27 miles of treacherous water.
So you know somebody who will drive the boat?
I have a person. You don't need to worry.
He believes the British system will continue helping migrants. But what he calls the system on the other side is, in fact, a vast and profitable industry. An industry run by a company called Serco, whose business model depends entirely on a steady supply of people just like the ones he's sending.
So, first of all, how much is the cost?
For example,
In which currency and how much?
how many people?
One. We do one, then more will maybe come, but one.
Okay. And I check it for you.
Huh?
7,000
Which currency? Dollar?
pound.
Euro?
Pound.
He needs them to cross once to earn his fee. The company's business model, however, thrives on the system continuing indefinitely. It is a £4.7 billion government contract, paid by the taxpayer to manage the consequences of these crossings. It creates a strange and troubling ecosystem, which leads to a fundamental question. How did the desperate journey of a human being become the raw material for a multi-billion pound government contract?
Welcome to the Discovery Clock series.
The answer begins decades earlier, in a Britain that looks very different from today. We begin in the glamour of the roaring 1920s. In 1929, the American entertainment giant Radio Corporation of America, RCA, created a British subsidiary, RCA Great Britain, with a simple job: to service the new, revolutionary talkies that were sweeping through cinemas. Across more than 350 cinemas, their specialist engineering business kept the projectors rolling for decades. But that wouldn't last forever. Their first great transformation would come from the shadows of the Cold War. In the 1960s, the company won a contract at RAF Fylingdales on the windswept North York moors, helping to operate the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, a nerve centre for NATO's nuclear defence, brought online in September 1963. It was here, working alongside the US Air Force and the British Royal Air Force personnel, that the company experienced a revelation. They realised their true potential wasn't in engineering a product, but in managing it. They tested this new theory in 1984, winning the Ministry of Defence's first ever outsourcing contract, beating firms such as Capita and GEC Marconi to manage a military warehouse at Donington in Shropshire. Serco applied the lessons from Fylingdales and proved they could run defence inventory control efficiently, delivering higher productivity and saving the Treasury millions.
Increasing industrial output, more jobs, action to help to keep prices down, a better deal with the oil.
Just as this was happening, a much louder revolution was shaking Britain to its core.
We're going straight to the palace where we think Margaret Thatcher is leaving.
Yes, we think this is Mrs. Thatcher this time. This is the first time we've seen Mrs. Thatcher as Prime Minister, and the cheers show it. Britain's first woman Prime Minister, a lot slower than the other car, which sped out some 50...
Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith. And where there is despair, may we bring hope.
The year is 1979. The new government, led by Margaret Thatcher, arrives with a powerful ideology known as the New Right. Thatcher's cabinet, including Chancellor Geoffrey Howe and Business Secretary Sir Keith Joseph, believed the state was too big, too costly, and too inefficient, and that the private sector held the answer to their spending problems. The age of privatisation had begun. The promise was a leaner, more efficient Britain, unshackled from the old state-run industries. But for vast swathes of the country, this new economic model felt less like liberation and more like a wrecking ball. The drive for efficiency and cheaper overseas production meant shutting down the industries that were once the backbone of the British nation: the coal mines, the steel works, and the shipyards. It triggered some of the most bitter industrial disputes in British history, unleashing huge protests and leaving deep and lasting scars on entire communities.
And in Trafalgar Square, confrontation. Into the evening it goes on, police chasing gangs up and down the West End streets.
It was a policy that would have long-lasting effects, creating a legacy of unemployment and social decay that would haunt these regions for decades to come. It was in this new, fractured landscape that the company saw its opportunity. When its parent, RCA, was taken over by General Electric in June 1986, the local management of RCA Great Britain seized their chance. They bought the company themselves in 1987 and gave it a new name, one that reflected their forward-looking philosophy: Serco, short for Service Company. 1 year later, on November 23, 1988, Serco was listed on the London Stock Exchange with an initial offering of 10 million shares. The principle was simple: the government would still pay the bills, at first through the Department of Health and Social Security, later the Home Office and Ministry of Justice. But private companies, hired on contracts overseen by civil servants, would now do the work of the state. And Serco was becoming the master of the model. In 1997, they took over maintenance of the Docklands Light Railway, guiding the trains of London's future. At the same time, they helped operate the atomic weapons establishment at Aldermaston, the core of Britain's nuclear deterrent, winning multiple contracts from the Defence Evaluation and Research Agency. Not satisfied with just winning contracts, they began buying the competition, acquiring American IT provider Resource Consultants Inc. in 1998 in a deal worth $535 million. By the late 1990s, Serco was a global force, running 7 prisons in Australia, managing air traffic control towers across North America, and employing more than 38,000 staff worldwide. But in 1997, the UK's political landscape shifted dramatically. After 18 years of Conservative rule, Tony Blair's New Labour won a decisive victory, promising modernisation and reform.
As I stand here before number 10 Downing Street, I know the huge responsibility that is upon me and the great trust that the British people have placed in me.
The foundations for one of New Labour's defining policies, the Private Finance Initiative, or PFI, were laid earlier under the Conservative government of John Major in 1992. PFI was introduced partly as a response to the Maastricht Treaty's requirements in 1993, which imposed strict limits on public sector borrowing and debt. The goal was to encourage private sector investment in public infrastructure, allowing government projects to be financed off balance sheet, meaning that they do not show up as part of the national debt. Despite this innovation, PFI was initially met with resistance and skepticism from the public sector, which lacked trust and experience in such partnerships, and from private investors wary of new complexities. Its implementation was limited and slow during the early 1990s. It was under Tony Blair's government, however, that PFI was adopted on a much larger scale and became a hallmark of New Labour's public sector reform agenda. Blair's administration significantly increased the use of PFI contracts, especially in the NHS, introducing a form of partial privatisation by shifting hospital capital investment and many support services to private firms. Hospitals built under PFI were no longer publicly owned, but leased back to NHS trusts under lengthy contracts, often spanning 25 to 60 years, with annual payments that created long-term liabilities for the public sector, namely the government. Between 1997 and 2010, the UK signed an average of 55 PFI's contracts per year, cumulatively worth over £54 billion, with the eventual taxpayer cost exceeding £300 billion. For companies such as Serco, PFI represented a major business opportunity, with the company holding £3 billion worth of contracts by 2003 in NHS hospitals, railways, and air traffic control, firmly embedding private sector providers in public services. Meanwhile, Blair's government also restructured the asylum system with the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999, creating the National Asylum Support Service, or NASS. NASS centralised asylum support, introducing a dispersal policy moving asylum seekers from costly, overcrowded areas in London and the South East to more affordable regions in the Midlands, North East, Yorkshire, Wales, and Scotland. Asylum seekers, though excluded from mainstream welfare benefits and the right to work, received taxpayer-funded support including free NHS healthcare, subsidised housing, food vouchers, and weekly allowances. By 2020, around 45,000 asylum seekers were supported through contracts with housing associations and over 300 local authorities, effectively turning local governments into contractors within a national system. Beyond asylum policy, Blair's premiership was also marked by his decision to open UK borders fully to migrants from the 10 new Eastern European EU member states in 2004. Unlike many European countries that phased in access controls, Blair's administration allowed immediate access to the UK labour market, leading to an influx of several million migrants over the next decade. This rapid population increase put considerable strain on public services, housing, and infrastructure, especially in working-class communities in the Midlands, Yorkshire, North East, and parts of London. Critics argue that this policy was implemented without adequate planning for social impact, contributing to tensions and fueling the political debates that persist today. This framework facilitated private companies, such as Serco, to entrench themselves substantially in delivering essential public services. They had built a corporate empire on one idea, that anything the government could do, they could do better. A trusted partner with a strong public sector ethos, as described by government advisors. Soon, the company would take this model into its most complex and sensitive area yet. It was a move that would prove more profitable and more controversial than anyone could have imagined. To understand why a company such as Serco shifted its business affairs into housing migrants, we have to understand the early political climate of the now 2010s. Britain was in the grip of austerity. Following the 2008 financial crisis, Chancellor George Osborne and Prime Minister David Cameron led a government whose driving obsession was cutting costs and reducing the national deficit, which reached £153 billion by 2009 and 2010.
Because the legacy we've been left is so bad, the measures that we need to deal with it will be unavoidably tough. But people's lives, and this is vital, people's lives will be worse unless we do something now. The cause of building a fairer society will be set back for years unless we do something now. We are not alone in this. Many countries around the world have been living beyond their means, and they too are having to face the music. And I make this promise to everyone in Britain. You will not be left on your own in this. We are all in this together, and we are going to get through this together. We will carry out Britain's unavoidable deficit reduction plan in a way that strengthens and unites our country. We're not doing this because we want to. We're not driven by some theory or some ideology. We are doing this as a government because we have to, driven by the urgent truth that unless we do so, people will suffer and our national interest will suffer too.
By 2012, most government departments faced real terms cuts of more than 20%. Every department was under pressure, and all were looking for ways to save as much money as possible. Asylum accommodation, then managed through a patchwork of more than 450 local councils and scores of housing associations, was seen as an easy target. To address this, the Home Office under Home Secretary Theresa May launched a radical experiment in privatisation.
There are millions of people in poorer countries who would love to live in Britain. And there is a limit to the amount of immigration any country can and should take. While we must fulfil our moral duty to help people in desperate need, we must also have an immigration system that allows us to control who comes to our country. Because when immigration is too high, when the pace of change is too fast, it's impossible to build a cohesive society. It's difficult for schools and hospitals and core infrastructure like housing and transport to cope. And we know that for people in low-paid jobs, wages are forced down even further, while some people are forced out of work altogether.
In March 2012, they introduced the Commercial and Operating Managers Procuring Asylum Support Contracts, better known as COMPASS. The plan was to dismantle the old system and replace it with 6 massive regional contracts, inviting competitive bids from the private sector with the goal of saving around £140 million over 7 years. The tender attracted a mix of national and international firms, security giants such as G4S, Reliance, Clear Springs, and Serco. Serco's strength was not in owning or managing housing directly, but in orchestrating the whole process as the prime contractor. They would be the sole point of contact for the Home Office, managing a complex supply chain of more than 50 subcontractors, including smaller property managers and housing charities. To keep costs down, Serco began leasing over 5,000 properties from private landlords, often in the cheapest rental markets across the northwest of England, the West Midlands, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. This strategy proved successful for Serco. They secured 2 of the 6 original COMPASS contracts, covering the Northwest, Scotland, and Northern Ireland from 2012 until 2019, with an initial value of more than £400 million. G4S won contracts in the West Midlands, Yorkshire and Humberside, and the North East. Clear Springs won in London, the South West, and Wales. All contracts were signed in March 2012 and became fully operational by January 2013. The COMPASS contracts consolidated what had been 22 separate agreements into just 6 national deals, transforming service delivery for the roughly 23,000 asylum seekers in supported accommodation at the time. However, the new system compromised the direct accountability that had existed under council management. as academic Dr. Jonathan Darling of Durham University highlighted in his research, a fragmented network emerged where responsibility was blurred and oversight was weakened. The public service ethos of holistic care gave way to private sector logic focused on delivering contracts at the lowest possible cost. By 2019, the Compass contracts, initially due to expire in 2017 but extended twice, were replaced by the Asylum Accommodation and Support Contracts, or AASC, signed under the new Home Secretary, Sajid Javid. These new contracts had a significantly increased value, approximately £4 billion initially, spread over 10 years, from 2019 to 2029. Serco secured two major contracts, the Midlands and East of England contract, valued at £1.03 billion, and the North West England contract, worth about £1.1 billion. Mears Group entered the arena at the same time and took over some contracts from Serco covering the North East, Yorkshire and Humberside, Scotland and Northern Ireland, with a combined value exceeding £1.4 billion. These contracts meant Serco and Mears together were responsible for accommodation for over 20,000 asylum seekers, nearly half of the UK total in supported lodging. At this time, the expanded market for asylum accommodation was estimated by the Home Office to be worth £15.3 billion over the next decade, reflecting the government's continued reliance on privatised provision. For Serco alone, the prize had grown from hundreds of millions to multi-billion-pound contracts, cementing its role as the ultimate middleman in this outsourced system. But Serco's ambitions didn't end at Britain's borders. Following its September 2022 acquisition of ORS, a Swiss provider of migrant services in Austria, Switzerland, Germany, Belgium and Italy, Serco rapidly broadened its European footprint. By 2025, ORS, as part of Serco, operated in 10 European countries and employed around 2,500 people, managing refugee accommodation centres, delivering integration programs, and supporting thousands of asylum seekers across the continent. In December 2023, Serco announced the €40 million acquisition of European Home Care, EHC, Germany's largest private immigration services provider, adding over 100 facilities and care for more than 36,000 asylum seekers to its portfolio. EHC, founded in 1989, generated revenues of €150 million in 2023 and employed more than 2,000 staff. Serco's former group chief executive, Mark Irwin, described this as a decisive move to strengthen our position as a leading partner in immigration services for European governments, and explicitly tied the deal to complementing ORS, now fully branded as ORS, a Serco company. With these acquisitions, Serco transformed itself into the preeminent provider of government-contracted asylum accommodation and support services not just in the UK, but across much of Europe. Serco's perfected business model, leasing thousands of properties from private landlords, managing a vast subcontractor network, and delivering services under rigid, fixed-price contracts, now runs on a continent-wide scale. But while the government believed it delivered its promised financial savings to the British people, the cost of the privatised asylum housing system was about to become terrifyingly clear. What started as a temporary emergency measure quickly spiraled into a nationwide crisis. When traditional asylum housing proved insufficient, the government turned to an unexpected solution: hotels. But these were no ordinary budget accommodations. Soon, images began to circulate of asylum seekers being housed in 3- and 4-star establishments, from historic country manors to modern city centre hotels. The cost to the British taxpayer was staggering, a bill that soared to £4.6 million per day in 2024, later rising to a peak of £8 million a day according to some estimates. In the 2023 to 2024 financial year, hotel accommodation for asylum seekers cost the government £3 billion, making up the bulk of an overall £4.7 billion spent on the asylum system that year. Behind the scenes, private contractors such as Serco were playing a significant role in managing and facilitating these hotel placements. The company's extensive contracts with the Home Office involved overseeing asylum accommodation, including coordinating with hotel chains and handling complex logistics. Critics argued that reliance on Serco amplified cost inefficiencies and masked the growing scale of the crisis, while scrutiny grew over the quality and suitability of the housing arrangements provided under such outsourced contracts. As the temporary measure became a long-term reality, the impact on local communities became a flashpoint. In towns and cities across the UK, including Epping, Knowsley and Skegness, reports began to surface of rising tensions. In some areas, accusations of sexual assault linked to asylum hotels led to arrests and fueled local anger, creating a climate of fear and mistrust.
It started in Epping after a 38-year-old Ethiopian man was charged with sexual assault. The alleged victim was a local teenage girl. In court, it was confirmed that he had recently arrived on a small boat. Since then, violence has continued around the Bell Hotel, which has been home to asylum seekers for several years.
The Home Office, under both the Conservative government of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the current Labour administration of Keir Starmer, faced repeated calls to address the social fallout and the strain on local resources. Some of this fallout was tied back to the operational decisions of contractors such as Serco, whose management practices and oversight in asylum accommodation came under criticism.
Failing Britain's poorest communities by cherry-picking their cheap accommodation in the pursuit of profit. Serco says this is unfair. It's allowed Newsnight's cameras in to watch its work in action and grill the person in charge.
There are plenty of people in the UK who say private companies shouldn't be involved in this area because you're trying to make profits out of it.
I think it's a very easy thing, private bad, public good. I think that, to have a healthy economy, you need all types of people to be delivering. But in certain services, I think that we are as public-minded as any public sector organisation. And if you've spoken to my people and you've spoken to some of them, I hope you would see they are very vocational people.
Inquiries questioned whether Serco's incentives aligned with effective community integration and safety measures, especially as tensions mounted and incidents increased around some contracted hotels. Residents also expressed frustration over what they saw as a lack of enforcement, pointing to asylum seekers working illegally as delivery drivers on mopeds, despite being forbidden from official employment under UK immigration law. Local authorities, including council leaders such as Patrick Harley and Dudley, publicly opposed the use of hotels, highlighting a sense of unmanaged chaos in the system. For many British people, this created a bitter contrast.
Protesters on opposing sides, both demanding to be heard.
A narrative took hold of a system that could find billions to house newcomers in comfortable hotels, while its own citizens were being let down. News stories in 2024 highlighted the plight of homeless British veterans, with the Office for Veterans Affairs estimating over 6,000 veterans without homes, many sleeping on the very streets the new arrivals were exploring. The taxpayer, funding the entire system through successive chancellors, Jeremy Hunt and, from July 2024, Rachel Reeves, began to feel a profound sense of injustice. That anger soon spilled out into the open. Protests became a common sight between June and August 2025. These were not fringe groups, but ordinary residents, parents, workers, taxpayers, who felt ignored and overwhelmed.
With the far right, because we can hear now shouts of "Hey, Tommy, Tommy." Do you know what? I'm 72. I'm not a racist. But what about the people around? I don't think they're racist. We prefer to call ourselves patriots.
They have done no risk assessment to the existing people in those communities. It's always the poorest communities, and if women don't stand up, right, because what annoys me is that I'll be labelled as a far-right Nazi bigot. I've been left-wing all my life, yeah? And I'm not far-right, I'm just right. And we have to protect women and girls.
They were no longer just protesting against a local hotel, but against a system they believed was failing them. However, beyond the hotel's crisis, the fallout from Serco's outsourcing ventures extended far beyond asylum housing. Across multiple sectors, the company found itself at the centre of major scandals that exposed deep-rooted failures and raised serious questions about the ethics of privatising public services. One of the most notorious controversies involved Serco's electronic tagging contracts with the Ministry of Justice. Between 2010 and 2013, Serco Geographics, their UK subsidiary, was found to have fraudulently charged the government for monitoring the movements of offenders who were either dead, imprisoned, or had left the country altogether. This overcharging scandal led to Serco agreeing in 2019 to pay fines and costs totalling nearly £23 million as part of a deferred prosecution agreement with the Serious Fraud Office. The company also paid out £70 million to the government to settle earlier allegations. Serco's CEO, at the time, Rupert Soames, publicly apologised, admitting that outdated management and culture had contributed to the fraudulent reporting. No board members or senior executives from that time remained in the company, which claimed significant reforms had been made since. It was a paradox, a system that generated public anger and social decay. Yet, from a different perspective, it wasn't broken at all. The real question was not if the system was working, but for whom it was working for. The answer to that question lies far beyond Serco's boardroom and in the financial capitals of the world. Meet the invisible hand that guides the modern outsourced state. They are some of the largest shareholders of Serco, and therefore the ultimate beneficiaries of its government contracts. To name just a few, these are titans of global finance, controlling assets worth trillions. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, controls over $10 trillion globally, more than the GDP of most countries. Vanguard manages roughly $9 trillion, known for its vast index funds and passive investment approach. JP Morgan Asset Management holds over $3 trillion in assets, bringing substantial influence through diversified investment strategies. Together, these firms are among Serco's largest institutional shareholders, owning around 20% to 25% of its shares. They manage money for millions of people, tasked legally with maximising financial returns. But the relationship goes beyond just shareholding. In 2017, Serco's pension fund appointed BlackRock to manage £1.5 billion in assets. So, the company profiting from migrant services pays its major shareholder to grow its pension assets, a hidden feedback loop of interests. In 2021, XPO Logistics, a global logistics powerhouse to which BlackRock is a significant shareholder, secured a 5-year contract starting to provide transport and storage services for the UK Border Force. This contract covers Great Britain, Northern Ireland, and the UK border at Coquelles in France. XPO's task is crucial, managing the secure transport of goods from the moment Border Force takes control, combined with integrated warehousing and supply chain systems tailored to the complex geography of border operations. In August of the same year, XPO spun off its own contract logistics business into a separate entity named GXO Logistics, of which BlackRock is also a major shareholder. GXO subsequently assumed responsibility for many logistics functions, including those tied to migrant crisis operations. Investigations revealed GXO-owned lorries were used in transporting and recycling the dinghies abandoned on British shores. Disturbingly, some evidence suggests these boats were subsequently returned to France, potentially feeding back into the smuggling supply chain, fueling a closed-loop system where every stage, from crisis management to clean-up, creates profit for overlapping corporate interests.
There was a whole batch of dinghies in the little area near the crane in the boatyard. Loads of them, all numbered. You'll have just seen that clip, hopefully. And I thought, OK, tomorrow the lorry's probably going to come. And guess what? There it is. So I'm going to go wander over there and just see if it's the same truck. Alright, today we're going to try and follow it. There it is. The lorry is leaving. But that is the lorry, basically, with all the dinghies on it. And if my idea is correct, that lorry is going to France. That's the lorry. Okay, so I'm going to prove it. Right, so that is getting on a ferry. Where to? That's the question, look. So the dinghies come into Dover, they get loaded onto a truck, they go back to France.
This is only one of the layers of this complex financial web. To understand the full picture, we must turn our gaze to the sea. Specifically, the offshore wind industry, which plays a surprisingly interconnected role. Seacat Services, founded in 1997 and headquartered in the UK, operates a fleet of high-speed offshore support vessels. Typically, their mission is straightforward: to ferry engineers, technicians, and critical equipment back and forth to offshore wind farms, primarily in the North Sea and along the southern coastlines, such as the English Channel. However, in late 2023, a significant shift occurred. Seacat's wholly owned subsidiary, Aeolian Offshore, was awarded a Home Office contract valued at approximately £2 million to assist in intercepting migrants crossing the English Channel. The same high-speed boats that once serviced wind turbines were repurposed to patrol waters and collect migrants for transfer to UK shores. This pivot exemplifies how maritime resources originally dedicated to renewable energy have been redirected towards border enforcement. Seacat Services is a private company. Its survival depends heavily on contracts with clients, and that means major offshore wind power players in Europe such as Ørsted, the Danish renewable energy leader, Equinor, the Norwegian state-backed energy company, RWE, one of Germany's largest power producers, Siemens Energy, the German conglomerate specializing in wind turbine manufacturing and energy solutions, SSE, a major UK utility company. These companies rely on Seacat's fleet to maintain their offshore turbines continuously, providing around-the-clock access in often challenging marine conditions. And it is here where BlackRock's involvement deepens. BlackRock is a leading institutional investor, or at least in the top 3 investors in nearly all of these offshore wind proprietors, holding stakes that are both substantial and financially significant. For Ørsted, BlackRock invested approximately 2.14% as of mid-2025, representing an estimated $1 billion. In Equinor, about 1.68% investment. In RWE, about 5% investment. For Siemens Gamesa, which merged into Siemens Energy in 2023, about 7.42%, and in SSE, around 8%. Through these stakes, BlackRock indirectly benefits from all the contracts and revenues generated by these companies. Breaking down these layers helps clarify the financial flow of this entire operation. Seacat Services and Aeolian Offshore operate the vessels servicing offshore wind farms and now in Migrant interceptions. These companies earn their revenue through contracts with the major wind energy firms, Ørsted, Equinor, RWE, Siemens Energy, and SSE. BlackRock stands as a top shareholder in each of these firms, reaping dividends and capital gains as these companies prosper. And finally to Serco's taxpayer-funded housing contracts for migrants. At every step, BlackRock profits from these linked operations. But how does the biggest shareholder view this crisis? Well, according to BlackRock's deputy CIO, Scott Thiel, in a 2015 report, migration has profound investment implications. The firm sees migrant inflows as an economic stimulus that boosts GDP in countries, thus making them attractive to foreign investment. Seen through this lens, asylum seekers become nothing more than a demand unit, a raw material input in a supply chain built to generate predictable, government-backed revenue streams. Solving the crisis was never the goal, for the crisis itself is the business model. The invisible hand of finance did not just guide this system, it constructed it for its own profit. It is tempting to see one company as the architect of this crisis, but the truth is more complex than that. Serco is simply the most successful player in a game designed by the state itself. For 40 years, a cross-party consensus has steadily converted essential public services into private, profit contracts. We have seen the result: a system where public taxes are channeled into corporate profits, benefiting the world's largest investment firms. A system where accountability is diffused through layers of subcontractors, and where the pursuit of a low-cost contract leads to a multi-billion-pound bill. The story of Serco and the migrant crisis is therefore not an anomaly. It reveals the fundamental conflict at the heart of the model. The legal duty of a corporation is to its shareholders, while the duty of a state is to its citizens. This new reality, where the lines between government and corporation have all but vanished, forces us to confront a deeply unsettling question. In an outsourced state, who is truly in charge? Hello everyone, if you've made it this far, I'd like to take the time to thank you for watching the video until the end, for your patience and support. This was a particularly long and difficult video to make. Please consider subscribing, and as always, see you in the next one.